And we're live. It is Tuesday, the 14th day of October. It is the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. And I did my second day yesterday of project littering. I have never been so proudly a litter bug as I have been the last 2 days. I made a little video, a second video about how to hashtag litter with me. And I went over to the Russian embassy and I picked a dead stalk of sunflower and um and walked it across the street and threw it in front of the building, or rather dropped it accidentally in front of the building. And I have to say it felt good. I've figured out a good methodology for this, which is to park my car on the same side as the embassy so that you drop the thing, immediately get in your car and drive away. Not that this will provide, you know, it's not like it's a getaway vehicle or anything because you're being filmed the whole time, and of course you're going to post it on Instagram. So it's not like, when you do this, if you get away quickly, you're going to get away with it. Except that, of course, how likely is it for the MPD or the United States Secret Service to follow you home in order to issue you a ticket for littering? Whereas if they see you on the spot do it, they might make you pick up the dead sunflower, or they might issue you a ticket. But if you get in a car and drive away, then it kind of raises the friction of enforcement a little bit. And besides, I welcome the day that a Secret Service officer or an MPD officer shows up at my house to issue me a ticket for littering. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. I have heard that many of Mike Feinberg's former colleagues are now on the metro issuing tickets to fare evaders and on, uh, you know, metro buses in the area. This seems like a very good use of FBI resources, so I'm open to it. If somebody wants to show up at my house and say, I hereby accuse you of dropping a sunflower in front of the Russian embassy, I would smile and say, um, yeah, you've been following my Instagram account. Um, so look, this is day 3 of Operation Litter with Me. If you are in the Washington area and you want to stop by the Russian embassy, pull a stalk of sunflower out of the ground and drop it in front of the embassy. Uh, Snap a picture, shoot it to me, snap a video. I'll share it on Instagram. Uh, because, folks, that's the kind of place we live in, where you got to do it. And you got to be proud of it. Good men must not obey the law too well, and we should be feminists about this and say good women as well. Not to mention good non binary people. Um, Folks, the sun is not shining. It's in fact drizzling out. The birds are chirping. It's gonna be a great fucking day. And you are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that occasionally a co host shows up but does not reveal himself. And so I have this sense of Mike as present, like a brooding omnipresence, kind of like Wendell Holmes described the common law.
Mike's going to jump in to correct you. That was learned hand.
Oh, learned hand, sorry, described the common law as a brooding omnipresence. But, just there to correct me periodically when I get something wrong, but not quite showing himself, presumably for reasons related to baby care, but not certain about it. And another one of the revolutionary features, because there are many, is that on this show, I urge you to commit crimes. But because I do it on a show, and because the shows are minor, really minor littering kind of crimes, um, we're going to make new law eventually, because we're going to find out whether incitement to littering, if it is removed by some number of hours, some number of hundreds of miles, and can be prosecuted. And I look forward to that case. I think I'm in the clear that I can say, guys, go out there, grab a stalk of sunflower, drop it in front of the Russian embassy, and I am urging you, you might say inciting you to commit a crime, but I am going to hang my hat on two really important things. One is that you cannot commit a conspiracy or an incitement to violate a trivial municipal ordinance. And the second is that that word imminent is doing a lot of work. If you're not, if I tell you, there's Nastia, go strangle her, and you grab her around the throat and strangle her, that's imminent lawless action. But if I say, in general, I think at some point you should pick a sunflower and throw it in front of the Russian embassy, and then you sit around and you stroke your beard and you contemplate my suggestion, and in some non-imminent way you go do that, then Brandenburg v. Ohio says I am exercising my First Amendment rights. And I will remind you that Mr. Brandenburg was a Klansman, and what he was urging in that speech that gave rise to that case was overthrowing the government of the United States and killing blacks and Jews, and that all his lawyers in, I believe, the Brandenburg v. Ohio case were Jews, and he was very annoyed by that, if memory serves. And so I am just slipstreaming in Mr. Brandenburg's wake, and I'm just telling you, go out there and litter. Grab a sunflower, drop it in front of the Russian embassy, post a video. That's all you got to do. Uh, Anastasiia Lapatina, back in her native habitat, back
My child's room.
from pretending to be a Norwegian.
Yeah.
How was your trip?
My trip was great, but it's one of those trips where, well, I mean, it was a work trip. It wasn't a vacation, but you know how people say you need a vacation after a vacation? So that's how I feel. I'm like, I need a break after this trip because it was too intense. I can't. The fact that I'm here talking to you and socializing is very interesting. That
So when you got back last night, you texted me a picture of a very asleep Ava.
mm-hmm.
When she woke up this morning and realized that you were there, what
It
was her
was
reaction?
it was actually so funny. I wish I would have filmed it, but she like just woke up and she like looked at me like from like her eyes went up and down there. She was like, "Who are you?" Like, you know. And then but then she obviously figured it out pretty quickly. But yeah, she had a little bit of an amusement situation going on.
Excellent. Well, welcome back, Mike Feinberg, Brooding Omnipresence. You've been traveling too, but it was mostly up this way, right?
Yeah, I was in DC. I did a panel with a New York Times reporter on the politicization of the FBI, and I did a rather unsuccessful foray into house hunting in the DC area, which is to be continued.
Interesting. Well, everybody has been traveling except me. Well, except that I was in
I
Aspen,
wonder
Colorado.
why that is.
Um, yeah, for the last few days. And I just want to say that it is cool to have everyone home. Mike, there is a giant skeleton in the Washington area that is giving
I
yours.
I I've seen it dressed up as the sandwich tosser.
Yes, exactly. The
Yes,
giant
yeah.
skeleton throwing a sandwich. And I have to say, I wish I'd thought of that. Um, I don't know whose phone that is, but Mike, what is on your mind this morning?
Um, a couple things. I think we should do a shameless plug for those in the DC area for the conference at which you and I will both be speaking next week.
The Society for the Rule of Law conference.
Yes, yes, I believe it is Wednesday.
Yeah, I believe it's the 22nd. That's a good idea. So the Society for the Rule of Law, for those who don't know it, is a uh, kind of um, it's run by an excellent gentleman named Greg Nunziata, and it was founded by uh, George Conway and um, Mike Ludig. And so it's kind of like, what if the FedSoc were actually committed to the rule of law? But it's a group of um, conservative or former conservative lawyers that are actually committed to their principles. Is that a fair description, Mike?
Yeah,
People
well,
like Mike Feinberg.
it was it was an explicit offshoot of the Federalist Society that I think was born out of frustration at how little they stood up to the Trump administration during the first term. And it was people like the ones you mentioned. I think Orrin Kerr, who's now at Berkeley, was one of the early members. And they were founded as checks and balances, which just isn't as catchy as the Society for the Rule of Law. So at some point they changed and they do this annual conference, and um, they really have a murderer's row of presenters. I did the pre-brief with the panel I'm on, and just suffice to say, I was easily the most inadequate and least prestigious person there. So it should be a pretty good conference.
I'm excited about it. Yeah, I will be hosting a panel with Judge Ludig and a number of other luminaries. Judge Ludig, whom I have not seen, uh, I want to say since he was on the Fourth Circuit and I was at the Washington Post, like 20 years ago. Um, and uh, yeah, so that's going to be great. Nastia, what is on your mind this morning?
Uh, Interesting question. Various political ideologies and American politics and American intellectual discourse over history and how Ukraine fits, or actually more accurately, does not fit at all into any of those things.
Yeah,
Uh,
so give us that's super vague. I know exactly what you're referring to because of hours and hours of texts with you yesterday while you were on the train.
right.
So give us a little texture.
Okay. Well, as people know, I was reading Ta-Nehisi Coates, and it was actually very funny because after I just finished the book around the time that we called yesterday when I tuned in. And then, you know how I am because I'm so young. I think it's a healthy instinct that I like am very careful with all of my opinions, and I like need validation from older people about what I actually think about things. And so I was reading the book, and particularly like the first two essays that are not about Palestine or Israel. I didn't like. I thought they were interesting and the writing was cool, but obviously I cared the most about the Israeli and Palestine option. And like I throughout the whole thing, I had an instinct that this is quite problematic, as in like as a piece of journalism, not the way I do it, you know, that kind of stuff. But I was like very careful about it, and then I had the conversation with you, and then I went and read a bunch of reviews of the book, which were brutal. From like not not like from the New York Post or something, like from your average sort of like the Atlantic, his former colleagues, you know. And that definitely solidified my opinion on the book being rather problematic. And so as I was thinking through that, I thought that, and it's not a new you know uh, feeling, I've been feeling this way for a while, and a lot of other Ukrainians have, I think. Like, it really sucks to be, and it's very complicated to be, like a Western oriented left leaning Ukrainian, like a young person in Ukraine who like sort of associates themselves with like the Western left, whatever that means. But especially if we're talking about the US, because like you're not super comfortable in Ukraine, because of course Ukraine, you know, has a great left-leaning, Western-leaning community, but things are complicated because we're at war, and it's, you know, there's a lot of things you can't talk about, blah blah blah, of like for obvious reasons. But then there's also no place for you abroad because nobody gives a shit about you. Like, to put it very bluntly, like, you know, not or if there are like American intellectuals who are deeply bothered by the fate of Ukraine and have spent decades writing about Russian colonialism, somebody sent me the names and the books and I'll read them. But like, it's because it's so awkward, because I felt it very intimately when I was in uni in Canada, because like college campuses suck, like just suck badly on all sides of the spectrum. I did not enjoy that experience, but but like the full scale invasion already began when I was in Canada, and so you can imagine me like walking around seeing freaking, I don't know, latent communist societies or something, or sitting in IR classes and literally being the only person in the room who doesn't hate America and thinks America is great, you know, and like having to argue about it and being like, there's a lot of good that your country has done for me, and like my country wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the US, and you know, it was a very, very, very uncomfortable thing. And now, like, to take it out of college campuses and into more serious conversations, it's the same thing. Like, nobody ever talks about Russia in like the left community. Not that nobody ever does. I mean, journalists do, but you know what I mean.
No, I absolutely look.
And it's not a new problem either. I know, like this has
No,
existed in history.
it's a super old problem.
Yes, yes,
So there's a and it's not one problem. It's many
yeah.
problems, and let's isolate several of them. First of all, um, and look, I want to emphasize my battle with the left is on ice. And,
What do you
you
mean?
know, like, I'm not fighting with the left these days.
Oh, I thought
And
it meant ice.
Ben, can
As
I
in
jump
great.
in? Because I think we've got a very similar view on this, which is right now there's really only one fight that matters, and that's sort of for democracy and the rule of law, both at home and
exactly,
abroad. And I disagree with the left on probably about 70% of their positions, but they're on the right side for that fight. And until that fight gets settled, I'm willing to declare a temporary truce on everything else under the sun.
exactly. And look, there's a long, long tradition of this. Remember that uh, uh, um, uh, um, you know, the tent that linked arms intellectually against fascism is extremely broad, right? It runs from left of Léon Blum to, the people who the anti-fascist German military officers who, uh, at the end of the war, toward the end of the war, tried to, overthrow the Hitler government, which included some, von Moltke's and Stauffenberg's and, people who were, and so I am right now not in the business of emphasizing my differences with the left. That said, um, uh, they are important, and it is important to, um, to understand that these alliances are temporary and that there are things that people believe whom I will lie down in traffic with that I will argue with while the light is red and, the traffic isn't coming yet. Um, and um, and I want to say that that does not diminish my admiration for them at all. Um, because right now the most important thing is the work that we can do together. And by the way, I have found that I love them very much in many cases. And so I don't want to, I do want to emphasize that these arguments are on ice. And as long as there is a common fight, I will have the common fight with them and, treat them like siblings. But we always have to remember, and that there will come a point where these arguments matter again. So let's look at some historic left pathologies. The first reason they don't see you is that you're white. Um, and the idea that Russian colonization of white people is a thing. They don't see
It,
Eastern Europe at all,
it doesn't exist
right?
in the
It
imagination
doesn't
at
exist.
all.
The concept that, Russia has, a near abroad or a Ruski Mir, right, that includes Finland, right? Like that includes like the right to rule over a whole bunch of people that they have a very hard time seeing as victims, even when, they are evidently victims of a massive imperial endeavor. Is that is a real blind spot. The second is that they have, uh, historically a soft spot for the Soviet Union, which has caused them to be, and again, not all of them, some of the most courageous, um, thinkers and actors, in the Soviet context. Orwell is comes to mind were leftists, but there are a
But
gazillion
but
others.
hate the Soviet Union too, and like bro,
Yes,
like half of his writing, I feel like, is criticizing other leftists about it.
exactly. And look, there was a giant. I mean, the giant of the American, left intellectuals in this context, in the American context, was a guy named Sidney Hook, who, had a similar. I mean, the first quarter of his career, he was a communist, and the rest of his career, he was an anti communist socialist who spent his time. And he was one of the only Americans who denounced Moscow before the Moscow trials.
What's his
So, I mean, there is a long tradition of exceptions to this, but a general rule that there is a kind of, uh, soft spot for the, horrors of the Soviet Union and a tendency to diminish, uh, um, its crimes, the magnitude of its oppression. So that's pathology number two. Pathology number three is a great distaste for American foreign policy and all its works, and a sense that anything that we must be supporting must have something deeply wrong with it. And this is where this actually does connect to the Israel Palestine issue, because so often in left circles, this shows up as whataboutism vis-a-vis Palestine, as in, I can't tell you how many times I have been projecting on the Russian embassy, uh, and somebody screams at me from a car, why are you here, not at the Israeli embassy? Or,
Yeah.
you're just trying to detract attention from Gaza. And you'll see that in comments in every single one of my, uh, every time I do one of these operations, there's um, uh, and so this sense that protecting Ukraine is something, it's like what people call gay washing or pink washing, right? That, like, we have this nice country of white people that we're nice to and we support, and it detracts from what we're really doing, which is helping Israelis kill Gazans.
How
And so
stupid do you have to be? Like, I'll just be frank. Like,
to believe that,
I mean,
no,
and
I
I know it's
like
common, but like,
it's really common.
it's
And
absurd to me.
well, it's absurd to me too, but I do think it is a real thing that exists. I think these are four semi-independent pathologies that exist on the left. By the way, none of which is as noxious or pernicious as the pair of pathologies that is governing the right now, which is number one, Trump's ego, and number two, you know, uh, uh, a vain solicitude for Vladimir Putin that nobody can explain. I mean, those are plus a kind of hatred of U.S. interventionism everywhere, which is shared in the shoehorn sense, by the right and the left. So I don't want to be too hard on the left in this, but this is a very old um, set of pathologies,
Hmm.
and with the exception of one of them is less old, which is the belief that white people can't be victims. That's a sort of creature of the post-colonial,
Everything.
identity politics era. But most of it goes back to 1917.
Ben, I would even push it back farther than that. There is a utopian strand in leftist thinking that goes back at least to the French Revolution.
Sure.
If
Well,
you
and
look at
not just sorry to interrupt, but not just utopianism. Utopianism intermingled with the use of extreme violence, right? This is
yeah,
Robespierre's virtue and terror speech.
exactly. I see, and I realize I'm probably um pretty unique in the people listening to this show right now and believing this, but like I see a direct line from Robespierre to Eric Hobsbawm's statements after the fall of the Soviet Union, that like even if he had known that the horrors of Stalinism were real at the time, he
Worth
still
trying.
would have supported this Soviet experiment because the potential payoff was so great. And when you consider that Stalin killed more people than anyone in history except for Mao, that's a pretty extreme statement.
Yes. Well, so I agree with that completely. I would also say I would appeal to a particular source of authority to support Mike's statement, and that is Lenin, who, in his writings, made clear that his criticism of Robespierre, and for those who do not know French Revolutionary history, just take my word, this is an extraordinary statement. His criticism of Robespierre was that he was, quote, insufficiently Jacobin. Um, which roughly translated to he didn't kill enough people, right? And so Lenin is also drawing this direct line that, from the French Revolution to the Russian Revolution and to the relationship between the most extreme violence you can imagine, which, let's be honest, the French were good for their time, but they didn't have machine guns, right? And the Soviets were, in a different league. It's not an accident that what Stalin, that the first wave of extreme violence was named a terror, right? And that was explicitly named after the terror of the French Revolution. And so, you have these, um, uh, you have these, their concept of a revolution and the relationship between utopianism and violence uh, comes directly from the French. And, I don't, and by the way, that is inherent and endemic to their criticism of liberalism, because what is liberalism at the end of the day? It's a means of using political tools and ideas to avoid violence, right? And the left's critique of liberalism has always been, in part, fuck that. What's wrong with violence?
It it's just
But this is the hard left here.
it
But
Like,
there's also been, I think, at least in contemporary society, the acquiescence to the need for violence might be unique largely to Americans, simply because the Europeans had the experience during the late 60s and early 70s of groups like Baader Meinhof and Red Army faction and the Red Brigades in Italy. And America had the Weather Underground, but they were never really as destructive or homicidal, not for lack of trying,
yeah, but
but
they just mostly blew up themselves. I mean, their
exactly.
biggest attack was on their own house in
Their own row
Greenwich
house
Village.
where they were planning to bomb army personnel. So there's like there's this naivete born from a lack of exposure to the real horror of political violence, which I fear America is going to be waking up to very soon.
I agree with that, although the American experience of political violence is, um, we have some extreme versions of it ourselves. We just
Yeah, we just
treat
don't
it
consider it. I mean, I don't want to dismiss the horrors of state-sponsored racism or
yeah,
anything
exactly.
like that. It's just
I think in the show.
that was done largely with the acquiescence and support of the government, whereas the things I'm thinking of were in direct opposition to the government.
Right, although remember the anarchists did take out a president, William McKinley, and the by the way, Italian anarchists, which were, there was a form of extreme violence in the early century that was, non-trivial. Um, uh, Look, but I basically agree with you. Sorry, Nastia, you were trying to get in.
No, I mean, this was just my little therapy session. I think what you were saying is a lot more substantive, but it's just, and I was talking about this with my colleague when we were in Oslo, because, I mean, if you go to Oslo, you're kind of overwhelmed with how, things work and everything is nice, and everyone knows how Norway is built and what their political situation is, and all of that, and you sort of can't ignore it, and we kept joking. So a running joke was like, man, socialism must be nice. Obviously we didn't actually mean that, but like anytime we'd see like a nice park or like babies playing in a clean public library, it'd be like, man, socialism is great. And so, and then from that, we like actually started seriously talking about it. And I was saying how, like, as a Ukrainian, all I know from my basic upbringing in this country is that everything that's sort of Marxism, socialism, communism, all of those things, like all of that is like evil stuff because all of that is the Soviet Union. And like there's no debate to be had. There is no unpacking anything, like none of that. It's just it's sort of it's in your blood that you hate that because that doesn't work and that's criminal and that killed your people. But then when you but like what if I want to like unpack some small parts of that conversation, and like that's awkward again because the people who I'd want to unpack this with, like various leftist American writers, they don't give a shit about me or my country, and my country doesn't want to hear a fucking debate about socialism because, like, rightfully so, why would anyone talk about that right now? And so it just puts you in this like interesting position where, like, okay, who do I talk to about this?
Right. So, so we have a really interesting discussion going on in the chat
Oh,
about
okay,
what Scandinavian countries really are,
right. Of
and
course, it isn't
you can say,
socialism, guys. I was joking.
no, 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 no. But it's actually a really interesting question because on the one hand, you can look at the extent of their social safety net and say, well, these are socialist countries. On the other hand, you can say Norway is a giant gas station. It is, it's basically like Qatar, in which it's distributing the proceeds from one of the biggest oil companies in the world among a very small number of people. And so you can
They also
call
have
that
like a
social.
40% income tax, or like 30, 40.
Yeah, it has high taxes, really high social cohesion, and so but it's also just rich as hell. And so what they did is they built a high, uh, um, you know, and by the way, their defense needs are entirely taken care of by the United States, or at least were
Wait,
until
Or
recently. Um,
can I jump in here because there's something about this debate that has always driven me nuts.
yep.
That is not acknowledged by the American left, and it was a big part of why I broke from it when I was in college, which is like the European safety net was started in very large part, if not entirely, through the subsidies of the Marshall Plan. This is not like something that was spontaneously created through the miracle of social democracy or socialism. Like, this was a very complicated wellspring of a network of benefits and social security programs that was funded in large part by the United States, which was enabled because the rest of the world was literally destroyed and bankrupt.
and
Like,
the US was
we,
taking
we
care of defense issues.
exactly, like
Not
this is
just
not
defense issues. It like the Marshall Plan was the rebuilding of Europe, right?
exactly. So to the extent that they were able to embark on this very large experiment was largely because somebody else was footing the bill. And because of the nature that really the post World War One map took, and then post World War II to a lesser extent, these countries all had an element of social cohesion and homogeneity that other regimes have not had the luxury. Luxury is the bad word. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but it does reduce some elements of social friction that larger countries like the United States have to contend with.
So all of that is correct, and I cannot think of a country that does not. I mean, Norway is an extreme example because all of that was true, and then North Sea oil happened,
I
right?
was just gonna
And
say, I actually obviously talked to Norwegians about it, and they would proudly say that their egalitarianism and like a national decision to be a country like this happened way before oil was discovered.
yeah, and that's true. Um, but the idea that you can do it and be that rich at the same time
Yeah.
is entirely a function of, external subsidies or underwater subsidies. Um, so look, can you name a country that developed with democratic socialism without major external subsidies? I cannot. Um, the closest I can think of is Canada, um, which
But
does not.
everyone hates the Canadian medical system, no?
Well, so like Canada's got a much more developed social safety net than the United States,
Mm-hmm.
um, although it varies a little bit by province. Um, but I cannot think of, um, you know, we are not in a major way subsidizing Canada the way we have subsidized Europe over time. Now, question whether Canada could do it without the degree of interlacing with the US economy that it has had. But I do think Canada is actually a better example of this, um, than a lot of European countries that everybody points to, because it's bigger, it's um, it's it's less subsidized. Um, it also has no external security threats worth speaking of, because it has oceans.
Are you sure
And
about that in this day and age?
I'm saying Canada, Norway, Canada's not going to get invaded, and Norway has been invaded, right? So, um,
Fair.
so I I agree with Mike, actually, that um, there is a sort of delusional quality to the way European social democrats talk about why they can do what they can do and what's possible. That said, I don't begrudge them it. I like it's it's great. And I don't have a problem with, look, the basic proposition that US taxes should be higher, we should be providing better social services, and um, uh, we should also be spending more on our military because we have certain overseas obligations that it is really important for world stability that we observe. We're never going to be able to be Finland or Norway or Denmark. But
But you could do better.
we can do a lot better than we're doing. And, you know, like there is no constituency in the United States. And this is where, to go back to the sort of argument with the left, greater military spending, higher taxes, better social services. That would be my political platform. And nobody across, like, I could get, if he were still alive, I think I could get John McCain to sign on to that,
Yeah,
because,
Ben, that
but
view has not really had a constituency since Partisan Review stopped publishing,
well, I was going to say,
unfortunately.
so Richard Wattenbarger wisely says that this is Henry Jackson, and that's exactly right, right? This is, it used to be that neoconservatives would insist they were Scoop Jackson Democrats. They were full of shit about that, by the way, for the most part. But if you look at what is Bill Kristol today, he's a Scoop Jackson Democrat, right? And what would Scoop Jackson be talking about right now? It would be like improving social safety net and supporting Ukraine. Right? That's the Scoop. And what happened to them? They all got driven out of the Democratic Party. And that's the discomfort that Nastia is talking about.
Well, yeah, because I I agree with the general, I guess, leftist framework of like not everyone starts at the same level of privileges and abilities, and the state has to kind of try to compensate for that a little bit. And I agree that there should be, higher taxes, including in like my own country. I'm not like lecturing Americans about the American politics, but then at the same time, and this is where a lot of people would hate me in my generation, or like especially in the US context, is that I do want the US to be a global superpower and whatever, a global policeman or whatever the phrase people use. And, because I've said that on Canadian university campuses, and people probably kill me
And this
for
is
it.
where you will never
Yeah,
find a receptive audience
I know.
on the left.
But like, to me, it's so like, it's such common sense, and I'm sure for you, Ben and Mike as well. But like, it is obvious that someone will play that role, and there are not that many contenders for it. And considering the other two options, like, I've always said that it's much more productive and better for the long term to criticize the hell out of the US but still want it to play that role, but just be a better version of that role, than to pull back entirely and have fucking Russia do it. And people just don't like, this is just inconceivable stuff for so many people, right? Like, they just don't understand what I'm saying.
Well, they've
And to
never
me,
had
this is
to live
obvious.
they've never had to live under Russian rule.
And their life has never been saved by America. They think that America can only hurt you, and I tell them stories about how I've been to random villages in eastern Ukraine where the bulk of resources that the local kids had stickers of USAID on it.
Not
Like,
anymore.
not anymore, but back several years ago, when I went to these little villages where people were in horrific conditions, some of the best conditions that I saw were sponsored by American money, and I think that's great. Like, I think the US should be doing that. I like, why is this a hard idea to wrap your mind around? I don't know.
Well, it's imperialism, Nastya.
How the
And it's all to cover up for the fact that there's starvation in Gaza.
right. Okay. Well, I've said
All
my
right.
piece.
Can I in a single question alienate everybody I've gained as a supporter since I've left the FBI here?
Yeah, but you have to show your face to do it.
Uh dude, I'm literally in my pajamas, and with a baby on top of me and trying to juggle cooking as well. Um, I have yet. Is every model of imperialism bad?
Oh, you're
Yeah.
not going to lose.
Okay,
You're
you're
not going to
going
lose.
there.
Wait, you're
No,
not
well,
going to.
well, well, no. Like, look, it is. Look, what the United States did to Germany and Japan after World War II
Right.
was very much a form of imperialism. It was forcing them to remake their civic culture and their political architecture in such a way that it would shed martial values, which had been a long part of its history, increase openness to other points of view, and begin to build the structure of democratic norms. Um,
And
I just,
Ukraine, like, Ukraine is another good example of this. The Americans would actually meddle in our stuff, and tell the government what to do. And I think that's great, because our government doesn't fucking know what to do. It needs to
Yeah,
know.
so I don't think this is an outrageous question at all. Let me.
Well, my I have since been canceled, but yes, go on.
Okay, so first of all imperialisms are not created equal. Um, and let me give you an extreme example, which is the imperialism laid out in Mein Kampf, which is, by the way, driven by a kind of bitterness that Germany does not have colonies. And Hitler lays out the vision of Lebensraum, which basically involved conquering all of Eastern Europe, enslaving Slavs, and killing Jews. That was the vision. And that imperialism, I will say, is objectively worse and more malicious than, say, British imperialism, which involved conquering areas, exploiting it for resources, and developing uh, um, developing local governance to a certain degree. British colonies have generally done better than non-British colonies in independence periods in most places in the world, though there are some awful counterexamples. U.S. imperialism took two forms. One was the conquest of the territory of of what is now the United States, which was awful with respect to the native populations that we ran over, but that absolutely nobody is talking about undoing. And ditto Canada and ditto Australia, right? The other form of US imperialism, which was a creature of the Spanish-American War, was the conquest of the Philippines, Cuba, right? From which there was a genuine post-colonial movement. I would say that, to call all of these things Soviet and Russian imperialism is still a different thing. To call all of these things imperialism is true, but they are so different that, and some of them, the results of which are so accepted and normal and just,
welcome.
part of, nobody is arguing except a few adorable Ukrainians who make Russia small again shirts. Nobody's arguing that the basic fruits of Russian imperialism, which is that Russia is a huge country, is going to be undone or should be undone, or
I think it's more than a few Ukrainians. I think people are talking. I mean, I saw an important Norwegian in Oslo wearing a shirt, "Make Russia Small Again."
Yeah, but it's mostly a joke, right? Nobody actually thinks that the Russian Federation is going to cease to be a really big country, and that, Catherine the Great won the debate about whether Russia should be Muscovy or whether it should be a big country.
I think we could discuss this further, but sure.
And so I just think the sort of the rote denunciation of imperialism as such. Canada's an empire. Are we opposed to Canada? Are we opposed to China? China's an empire,
Yes,
guys.
yes, we are emphatically opposed to China. Yeah, I mean, come on.
Good.
Many countries are the results of imperial acquisitions at what we think of as Egypt is really why is Egypt demarcated the way it is? And it's because it's roughly, it's roughly what the Greeks and Romans would have thought of as Egypt, right? What the pharaohs ruled. It's imperialism. So I actually think it makes sense to compare imperialisms. I really, really don't like the Nazi vision of imperialism. I really don't like the Belgian vision of imperialism. But some
cutting hands off.
Really? Oh, they were incredibly murderous.
Yeah.
Belgium.
Read Adam Hochschild's King Leopold's Ghost.
Yeah.
For anybody who is interested in that topic, it's a really good intro.
I mean, they were astonishingly murderous. The Portuguese, really not great. The British, depends where you were.
But still, right? Generally bad still, right?
Sure. Being conquered sucks, right? But I do think, but am I proposing that we break up Canada and Australia as a result of it? No. Right? Is anybody? No.
I mean, and so sure, there are some leftists who probably are. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, is anybody?
Canada as a whole. I mean, people who care about Indigenous people, and all of that.
But the point is merely to say something is an imperialism, um, is to observe that it results from something that is, you know, the idea that countries shouldn't conquer each other is a pretty recent idea.
This conversation is stressing me out. So often when I come here, I'm like, if I ever, I don't know, run for office and people dig out these interviews where I'm sitting in my pajamas and engaging in polemics about whether imperialism is really all that bad.
No, it's not that imperialism isn't really all that
I
bad. It's
know,
that
I know.
imperialisms are not all the same.
Yeah, yeah.
By the way, there was Swedish imperialism once. Finland used to be a colony of Sweden, and we can
Yeah,
get Minna
they
to
somehow
talk
get
about that.
along amazingly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they get along really well.
the
It's
Nordics, and they like
Yeah,
joke
and
about.
and we shouldn't forget that part of the reason Peter the Great did try and build up Russia was in response to Swedish hegemony.
right to Gustavus
And
Adolphus.
Nastya, that is not a defense of Russia.
I
It
know,
is a historical
I
anomaly.
know, I know,
That is it.
I know, I know.
Okay, so here is my another imperialism question for Nastya. There was another great imperial power that ruled over big chunks of Ukraine, and it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to this day, there are lots of residues in the Ukrainian language of German that, come pretty directly, I think, from Austro-Hungarian influence. There's also
There's architecture in Lviv.
really architecture in Lviv.
You can do it
So
like a tour if you come to Lviv as a tourist. There's a like a historical tour you can do of like, the sites associated with the Austrians as like, the rulers of Lviv. So yeah, it's a big part of history, especially in Western Ukraine, which is what was under the control.
and yet, there is no particular animus among Ukrainians toward Austrians. Is that fair?
Yeah, I don't think anyone gives a shit about the Austrians, but it's big.
Proving, I think, that all imperialisms are not created equal. No?
Sure, but yeah, and I guess it's about whether your behavior has changed and and the current situation. Just like, I mean, nobody had any problem with the Poles until they started having a problem with us, and then we reminded them that actually, they were an imperial power here, and we have some problems with them as well. But none of these problems were a part of the public conversation until like one party sparked it, even though they genuinely were considered an imperial power here. Like they came and took our land, and then we, did a bunch of bad stuff as well to kick them out of here. But nobody had any problem with the Poles. Same with Austrians. If they suddenly start like invoking some historical issues, we're gonna remind them who was who.
But this is exactly my point, which is that we live with the residues of imperialism without a lot of resentment. And we feel very differently about imperial designs on us now. The borders of Ukraine are entirely arbitrary, and yet people feel very strongly about them for all kinds of completely understandable reasons. The borders of almost all countries are arbitrary. And so I'm going to give Mike the last word since you raised this question, Mike. What do you think about should we distinguish between imperialisms?
Well, first of all, I do need to go back in the conversation a few minutes and just give a plug for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I'm a huge fan of the Habsburgs. The cultural no, I'm serious. Like the cultural flowering.
But this is very interesting for me right now.
No. The cultural flowering that we
Mike is
saw
right.
in between basically the revolutions of 1848 and the end of World War One, whether it's Miklos Banfi in what was then Transylvania to Stefan Zweig in Middle Europa or Joseph Roth, like that was a magical time. And I don't know why. I have yet to hear an explanation of it.
Brahms, man.
There's a
Like
lot.
the
Like
amount that is going on in Austria-Hungary,
it's insane.
including the development of national consciousness in lots of countries, is magical.
Yeah, it's so I don't know that I'm gonna weigh in on imperialism writ large. I'm just gonna say that I love Stefan Zweig. Wes Anderson is one of my favorite filmmakers, and his rough adaptation of Stefan Zweig's Milieu, The Grand Budapest Hotel, is one of my all-time favorite films. To those of you who have not familiarized yourself with the flowering of the late Habsburg Empire, I encourage you to do so.
So
I just want to
can I
go ahead,
have
Nasta.
last question? We need to settle
Yep.
my socialism debate.
No, it'll never be settled.
Okay.
It'll never be
No,
settled.
but is the basic premise from the two of you is that unless you have a shit ton of money, it never works? Is that the, Or
I would
No,
make that. I'd make that my premise, Ben.
well, I will not make it mine.
Yeah.
I will state the following. I am exactly as socialist as you can do, consistent with A, robust democracy, B, the rule of law, and C, consistent long-term economic growth. I don't believe in socialism for the purposes of distributing meager economic output equitably. I think that's a dubious accomplishment. But if you can have a growing economy that's actually producing wealth, I believe in distributing it as equitably as you can.
great.
And
Okay.
and I but the moment you can't do one of those things, the backbone has to be capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And which is
Because
why Norway still
that's how you generate wealth.
yes.
Socialism doesn't actually generate wealth.
Yeah.
It's a distribution strategy, which is why I don't call myself a socialist. I call myself a welfare state liberal, right?
Nice.
But because at the end of the day, you need a capitalist backbone in order to support whatever redistribution you want to do. And I do think first you have to grow. And different countries are going to have different ways of doing that, but you can't distribute wealth you don't have. And so that I don't know how different in practice that makes me from Mike, but it is, I think, philosophically different.
Yeah, I think. We're already at 9:03, so I'm not going to get into it. I'll just say,
Go to the chat.
the reason I became conservative. There's a misconception about conservative in America, which may be true today, but was not true when I was sort of intellectually coming of age, which is that conservatives don't care about equity or the lower classes or socioeconomic disparities. What drove me to conservatism was just a belief that none of the proposed solutions by the left could actually ameliorate any of those problems. And this isn't something I necessarily got from reading, Russell Kirk or National Review. You see it in leftist thinkers too, like Lionel Trilling, who were just driven out of the left because they didn't focus on the right type of inequities for the dominant strands of liberalism at the time. I'm just sort of rambling. I've been up since
This was
4. I have a
interesting.
screaming child. This
All
is
right.
what
I just
happens.
want to say this is the first time we have ever done a show in which two co-hosts are both in their pajamas. And so it's also the first time we've excluded the news and just focused on the deepest questions like, are we pro or anti Habsburg? And I love this show very dearly. And we're going to be back tomorrow, folks. Hey, on Thursday, we are going to have the great Laura Field, who has written a truly magnificent book that I was privileged to blurb, called Furious Minds, which is a intellectual deep dive into the new right and its leading thinkers, from the Claremont Institute to Adrian Vermeule
I
to Bronze Age pervert. And no, I'm not making that up. Um,
Ben, I didn't realize you blurbed this. I've had it pre-ordered for months on Amazon.
Laura has
Oh
become a
wait,
friend.
that was your blurb?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. I didn't realize that.
Laura has become a good friend. I read some of the chapters of this in draft, and I think this is actually a truly important book, and I encourage everybody to read it. She is going to be doing a series of lawfare lectures related to the themes of this book. But her debut public appearance about this book, before it even comes out, will be on lawfare, on Dog Shirt TV on Thursday morning. So get ready for that. Tomorrow, I have no idea what we're going to do, but we're 8 minutes over already, and that's not allowed. So we'll see you tomorrow.